"20 minutes after beating someone to death, they smiled for the camera. This is real. These 8 men had just kicked an 18-year-old boy so brutally that he died before reaching the hospital. And this is what they did next. This is the story of Fernando Báez Sosa, a case that took 50 seconds to unfold, but 5 years to understand. It's about racism Argentina refuses to acknowledge, privilege that believed it was untouchable, and a family that refused to let their son become just another statistic. I'm going to show you evidence that made a nation rage, text messages that proved their mindset, and security footage that captured evil in real time. But more than that, I'm going to show you why this keeps happening and why Argentina is still wrestling with the uncomfortable truth this case exposed. Welcome to True Crime Buff HQ, seeking justice for the voiceless. I'm George, and before we begin, I need to give you a warning. This case contains racist language, extreme violence, and disturbing behavior. I'm going to handle it with care, but you need to understand what happened to demand it never happens again. This is a 45-minute deep dive. I know that's a commitment. But Fernando's story deserves every second. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and stick with me. Let's get into it. To understand why Fernando died, you first need to understand where he came from. Not just geographically, but what it means to be Paraguayan in Argentina. Because that distinction, it was written on his death certificate. Fernando's parents, Silvino Baez and Graciela Sosa, they came from Carapicuá, a small town in Paraguay. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. It's the kind of place people leave because they have to, not because they want to. Paraguay in the 1990s was struggling. Economic hardship, limited opportunities, and for Silvino and Graciela, a future that looked pretty bleak. So they did what millions of immigrants have done throughout history. They crossed a border, hoping for something better. They settled in Recoleta, a neighborhood in Buenos Aires. And on March 2, 2001, Fernando José Báez Sosa was born. Their only child, all their hopes, all their dreams, all their sacrifice. It all went into this one beautiful baby boy. But here's what you need to understand about their journey. Silvino took a job most Argentines wouldn't want. He worked as a bricklayer, as a doorman, what they call a portero. Graciela? She did work that required watching people die. She was a hospice care worker. They did this brutal, exhausting, often invisible work for one reason. A reason that would make Fernando's murder even more devastating. They wanted Fernando to be the first university graduate in their family. They wanted him to rise above, to be seen as Argentine, not just Paraguayan, to have opportunities they never had. But here's what most people outside Argentina don't know, and frankly, what many Argentines don't want to admit. Argentina considers itself the European country of South America, white, sophisticated, descended from Italians, Germans, and Spaniards. But there's a racial hierarchy nobody wants to talk about. And at the bottom of that hierarchy, people who look like Fernando. There's even a derogatory term, Paraguay, used for Paraguayans. It's dismissive, it's othering. And Fernando's parents heard it all the time. Everything Silvino and Graciela did, the brutal hours, the discrimination they faced, the backbreaking work, was so Fernando could become something they never could, so he could be accepted, so he could belong. But Argentina would remind him exactly where people like him were supposed to stay. Fernando wasn't just a good kid. He was the kind of person who actually lived by the values most of us just talk about. And there's one single moment with his girlfriend, that tells you everything about who he really was. Growing up in Recoleta, Fernando faced subtle discrimination. Teachers would sometimes be surprised by how intelligent he was, as if they expected less. Other kids would sometimes make comments about his appearance, his heritage. But Fernando pushed through. He was kind, studious, loyal to his friends who knew him as fair. He was a high achiever despite the obstacles constantly put in his path. In high school, Fernando did something that defined his relationship with his parents, something that showed he understood sacrifice in a way most teenagers never do. He insisted on working part-time jobs to help with family finances. When his parents told him to focus on his studies, he refused. He'd seen his mother's exhaustion after long shifts watching strangers take their final breaths. He'd seen his father's worn hands from years of manual labor. He wanted to carry some of that weight. That was Fernando. He decided to study law at the University of Buenos Aires, one of the most prestigious universities in Latin America. That's where he met Julieta Rossi, also a law student. They started dating, and Fernando had a very specific dream about his future career. He wanted to practice immigration law. He wanted to defend people like his parents, people who came to Argentina looking for opportunity and instead found discrimination. Now, that moment with Julieta I mentioned earlier, December 2019, 2 months before his death. They're at dinner celebrating their 9-month anniversary. Julieta's parents are wealthy. Her father's a lawyer, mother's a doctor. They offer to pay for Fernando's books for the next semester. You know what he said? "Thank you, but my parents can handle it. They've always handled it. Let that sit." Julieta told investigators this later. She said he was protecting his pride, yes, but more than that. He was protecting his parents' dignity. He wouldn't let anyone suggest they couldn't provide for their son. That's who was beaten to death on January 18, 2020. Not just a statistic, not just a victim. Fernando Báez Sosa. Remember that name? January in Argentina means summer, and summer means Villa Gesell, a beach town 376 kilometers south of Buenos Aires, where teenagers go to celebrate freedom before university starts back up. Fernando had never been. He was so excited. His friend group planned the trip for months. 6 friends total, plus Julieta was invited to join their 10-month anniversary trip. They booked rooms at Hola Ola Hostel and planned to stay from January 16th through the 23rd. 1 week of beach, music, and memories. January 16th and 17th were perfect. Beach days, exploring the town. Those photos, you can see the pure joy on their faces. 7 young people with their whole lives stretching out before them. But at the same time, in the same town, another group was checking in. 8 rugby players from Zarate, and one of them had already been posting disturbing content online. January 18th, their plan was to go to Le Brick nightclub. Le Brick was the spot for young people in Villa Gesell, known for being packed, sometimes overcrowded, but always the place to be. Around 1:30 a.m., Fernando and his friends arrive. Here's something crucial, though. Le Brick had a history. Local police had responded to fights there before, mostly involving, and I want you to remember this, young rugby players from out of town who came to Villa Gesell and got aggressive. The venue's security knew the pattern, but that night, they weren't prepared for what was coming. Fernando's group, 7 people, mixed gender, dancing, drinking casually, just having fun. The rugby players group, 8 to 10 men, all from the Zarate Rugby Club. They'd rented an apartment together and had already been drinking heavily before arriving. The rugby players didn't know Fernando. Fernando didn't know them. But investigators would later find something on one of their phones, a pattern of searches, of messages, of behavior that suggested this group was looking for confrontation. They wanted to fight. The question was, who would be unlucky enough to cross their path? But before we get to that nightclub, before we watch what happened in those 50 seconds, you need to understand who these 8 men were. Their backgrounds, their culture, their entire worldview. It all led to that moment. And Argentina needed to confront that. Let's talk about rugby in Argentina and why the word rugbier makes people uncomfortable. In Argentina, when you say someone plays rugby, you're not just talking about a sport. You're talking about class. You're talking about money. You're talking about a specific type of masculinity, and sometimes you're talking about violence that goes unpunished. Rugby arrived in Argentina through British colonialism in the 1800s, and from the very beginning, it became the sport of the elite. Private clubs, expensive equipment and membership fees, country clubs and European vacations. Compare that to football, soccer, which is the people's sport. Anyone can play football. All you need is a ball and an open space. But rugby requires privilege. When you put on a rugby club jersey in Argentina, you're not just representing a team, you're representing a class. You're signaling where you come from, who your family is, what doors are open to you. The term rugbier emerged to describe these young men, and it carries weight. Privilege, entitlement, and yes, sometimes violence. Sociologist Guillermo Levy, who studied this case extensively, said, "Rugby in Argentina is not just a sport. It's a marker of social position. When these boys put on their club jersey, they're not just representing a team, they're representing a class." But there's something else about rugby culture in Argentina, something about the training, the team mentality, the pack dynamics. Rugby emphasizes group cohesion above everything. The pack mentality in scrums, moving as one unit, protecting your teammates above all else, seeing outsiders as the enemy. When channeled properly, this builds camaraderie. But when it goes wrong, it becomes mob violence. Add in the machismo culture within many teams, the drinking culture, the boasting about fights and conquests, the code of never breaking ranks. After Fernando's murder, a rugby coach named Facundo Sassoni wrote an op-ed that went viral. He'd been in rugby for 30 years, and he finally said what needed to be said. "We trained these boys to move as one unit, to protect the pack above all else, to see outsiders as the enemy. Then we act surprised when they beat someone to death together and refuse to break ranks." Argentina didn't want to hear it, but he was right. And here's something that should terrify you. After Fernando's murder, journalists investigated other incidents involving rugby players in Argentina. What they found was disturbing. In the previous 5 years, there had been at least 15 serious assaults involving groups of young rugby players. Most victims? Working-class men, indigenous-looking men, immigrants. See the pattern? Now let me introduce you to the 8 men who killed Fernando. And I'm going to show you their faces. I'm going to tell you their names. Because they weren't faceless monsters, they were privileged young men who thought they were untouchable. And that's exactly why this case matters. Maximo Thompson, 20 years old at the time of the murder, known as Machu by his friends. Middle-class family from Zarate. Maximo was the ringleader. He led the attack, and he delivered the fatal kick, the one that killed Fernando. Investigators found videos on Maximo's phone, videos from previous nights out, and what they showed made prosecutors' blood run cold. This wasn't his first time. Ciro Pertossi, also 20, one of the first to strike Fernando. His DNA was found under Fernando's fingernails, which means Fernando fought back against him specifically. The morning after the murder, Ciro searched Villa Gesell fight multiple times on his phone. Security footage shows him licking his knuckles outside the apartment, trying to remove Fernando's blood with his tongue. He's the brother of Luciano and cousin of Lucas. This was a family affair. Enzo Comelli, 20 years old. He threw the first punch at Fernando. He had a wrestling and fighting background, which means he knew exactly how to hurt someone. During the trial, he would say something that revealed just how disconnected from reality these men were. But we'll get to that. Mattias Benicelli, Luciano Pertossi, Lucas Pertossi, Blasinali, and Arten Violas. Ages ranging from 18 to 21. All active participants. All from the Nautico Arsenal de Zarate Rugby Club. Now their backgrounds. All 8 came from middle to upper middle class families. Zarate is an industrial city about 90 kilometers north of Buenos Aires. Their parents, business owners, professionals, managers. One father was a successful businessman. Another's mother was a school principal. These weren't kids from broken homes. These weren't kids failed by the system. They had every advantage: private education, European vacations, cars, expensive clothes, the latest phones. So what made them think they could beat someone to death and walk away? Remember those videos on Maximo's phone? Let me tell you what was on them. They showed him and his friends harassing other young men on previous nights out. Intimidation, slurs, threats. In one video from December 2019, just 1 month before Fernando's murder, you can hear them laughing about putting a Negro in his place. This was a pattern. Fernando wasn't their first victim. He was just the one who didn't survive. Sociologist Sebastian Bruno, who specializes in immigration and race in Argentina, explained it perfectly. These young men had learned from their families, from their schools, from their rugby clubs, from society, that certain people were beneath them. And when you dehumanize someone completely, violence becomes easy. Now we need to talk about something uncomfortable, something Argentina doesn't want to discuss. Argentina is deeply, profoundly racist, but it's a specific kind of racism, one that hides behind language, behind class, behind euphemism. And it's what killed Fernando. Here's what most people outside Argentina don't understand. Argentina has a racial hierarchy that it refuses to acknowledge. At the top, European-descended white Argentines. In the middle, mixed heritage, acceptable immigrants with Italian or Spanish ancestry. Lower, indigenous peoples, darker-skinned mestizos. At the bottom, recent immigrants from Paraguay, Bolivia, Peru. Dr. Annie Okoro Luango, an Afro-Colombian researcher at Argentina's National Scientific and Technical Research Council, told me, Argentina has perfected the art of racist denial. They'll tell you racism doesn't exist there, that Negro is just about class. But watch what happens when a dark-skinned Paraguayan boy and a blonde rugby player compete for the same space. That's when the truth reveals itself. There's a specific word you need to understand, a word that was screamed at Fernando as he died, a word that Argentina insists isn't racist. But when you understand its history, its usage, its power, you'll see why this case exposed everything. The word is Negro, literally translates to black. In Argentina, it has complex usage. It can be a term of endearment between equals, like when friends call each other bro or dude. But, and this is crucial, it's also used as a slur against indigenous people, darker-skinned people, immigrants from lesser countries, poor people, anyone deemed inferior. There's a specific phrase you need to understand: negro de mierda. In English, this translates to a combination of a racial slur and profanity, roughly "king black" or "ht black." It's universally understood in Argentina as a violent slur that combines racial and class hatred into two words. From this point forward, when witnesses or evidence references this phrase, I'll refer to it as the slur. But you now understand the hate behind those words. A news headline from Crónica TV once read, "Two people and a Bolivian die," as if Bolivians aren't people. Colombian news reported, "Citizens and indigenous people clashed," implying indigenous people aren't citizens. Common phrases include negro vilero, black slum dweller, and pibe corro, thieving kid, both racialized. So when the rugby players screamed negro de mierda, mátenlo, at Fernando, shitty black, kill him, they weren't just being classist. They were being racist. They were marking him as subhuman, as someone who didn't deserve to live. Argentina's media didn't want to say it. The court system danced around it. But Fernando's father would. In a letter that circulated before the trial, Silvino Baez wrote, "My son was beaten for racist reasons. It was hate. Maybe they felt superior because they're blonde and Fernando had dark skin." That was the first time a major Argentine newspaper printed those words, racist reasons. And the country lost its mind. Now you understand the context, the culture, the hierarchy, the hate. Now let's go back to that nightclub. Because what happened at 4:30 a.m. on January 18th, 2020 was the inevitable result of everything I just showed you. Security cameras captured 47 different angles of what happened that night. Investigators watched hundreds of hours of footage, and what they found was chilling. The attack was the climax, but the hostility had been building for hours. 1:30 a.m. Both groups enter Le Brick around the same time. They start on different sides of the dance floor. No interaction yet. Between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock a.m., the rugby players get progressively more aggressive. They're harassing women on the dance floor, deliberately bumping into people. Security is watching them closely, but not intervening. Fernando's group is oblivious, just having fun. One witness, a woman who was at the club that night, told police something chilling. Around 3 a.m., she heard one of the rugby players say to his friends, "Tonight we're going to fuck." She thought he was drunk, talking shit. She told police later, "I should have told security. Maybe Fernando would be alive." By 4 o'clock a.m., the venue is overcrowded, actually violating fire code. Tensions are high throughout the club. Staff are discussing shutting down soon. Both groups are now near each other, and then it happens. 4:27 a.m. Fernando's friend Juan Manuel Pereira Rosas accidentally bumps into Enzo Comeli while dancing. Juan Manuel apologizes immediately. It's clearly an accident. Enzo responds aggressively. Other rugby players immediately surround them. A verbal altercation escalates. Here's what's important. Security guards move in quickly. They physically escort the rugby players out of the venue. The rugby players are yelling, resisting, but they're removed. Fernando's group voluntarily leaves too, trying to avoid further confrontation. Inside the club, the groups were separated. Security did their job, but outside, there were no barriers between them anymore. Fernando and two friends wait outside for the rest of their group, who are still inside or in the bathroom. They're trying to leave peacefully, go back to the hostel, end the night. The rugby players are outside too, regrouping. The two groups see each other. What I'm about to describe is violent. I won't show graphic footage, but you need to understand the brutality. Not for shock value, but because this level of violence reveals intent. This wasn't a fight. This was attempted murder that succeeded. And there is one detail, one thing captured on camera that proved beyond any doubt this was premeditated. Video shows the rugby players strategically surrounding Fernando's position. They spread out, cutting off escape routes. This takes 7 seconds. A forensic analyst studied this footage frame by frame, and she found something that made the defense's argument collapse. Their body language, their positioning, their coordinated movement. She said, in those 7 seconds, you can see them executing a formation. 3 in front, 3 to the sides, 2 blocking the escape route. This is identical to a rugby play called a backline defense. They practiced this. They knew this. They used their rugby training to trap him. The defense said it was spontaneous. The video proved that was a lie. Seconds 1 to 5. Enzo Comelli throws the first punch at Fernando, connects with his face. Fernando staggers but stays upright. He tries to back away. Seconds 6 to 15. Ciro Pertossi attacks from the side. Fernando is surrounded. Multiple punches from multiple attackers. Fernando's friends are screaming, trying to reach him. Other rugby players physically block them. Tatiana Caro, a woman waiting for a taxi, testified. I heard them yelling, "Negro de mierda," over and over. One said, "We're taking this Negro as a prize." They were laughing. While they were hitting him, they were laughing. Seconds 16 to 30. Fernando falls to the ground. The attackers don't stop. The kicking begins. Body, ribs, head. Fernando tries to protect his head, curling up into a defensive position. Seconds 31 to 45. Fernando is unconscious. The attackers are still kicking. They're focusing on his head now. Maximo Thompson runs up and delivers a full-force kick to Fernando's head. The sound of impact is audible on the video. Tomas Bidondo testified. That last kick, I heard it from across the street. It sounded like kicking a soccer ball, but it was his head. I'll never forget that sound. Seconds 46:50. The attackers step back. They look at Fernando, motionless on the ground. One of them spits on him. Then they start walking away. Fernando's friends finally reach him. 50 seconds. That's how long it took to kill Fernando Báez Sosa. His friends are screaming his name. He's not responding. There's blood from his nose, his ears, his mouth. He's not breathing normally. Someone calls an ambulance. Security finally comes back outside. In trauma medicine, there's something called the golden hour. If you can get a critical patient to the hospital within 60 minutes, survival chances increase dramatically. Fernando had less than 50 seconds of attack time, but what happened in the next hour would be equally devastating, because the rugby players weren't done. While Fernando lies dying on the ground, most of the rugby players haven't even left. They're standing nearby, watching, laughing with each other. Zero concern. Matias Figueras, one of Fernando's friends, testified about something that haunts him. Something one of the rugby players said while Fernando was dying on the ground. Lucas Pertossi looked at Fernando and said, "Did we kill him?" Blasinali responded, "I don't know, but who cares? Let's go." Then they laughed. While Fernando was dying, they laughed. 5:15 a.m. The ambulance arrives. Paramedics assess Fernando. Critical condition. Multiple skull fractures, brain hemorrhaging, broken ribs, internal bleeding, traumatic cardiac arrest imminent. 5:25 a.m. Fernando is loaded into the ambulance. Only Julieta is allowed to come. She's holding his hand as they race to the hospital. 5:47 a.m. Fernando's heart stops in the ambulance. Paramedics begin CPR. Julieta is watching in horror. 5:52 a.m. They arrive at the hospital. The emergency team is waiting. They rush him to the trauma room. 6:14 a.m. Doctors pronounce Fernando Báez Sosa dead. Cause traumatic cardiac arrest secondary to multiple blunt force head injuries. Julieta collapses. While Fernando died, while his girlfriend screamed, while his friends wept. The 8 rugby players were doing something so sociopathic, so devoid of humanity, that when the evidence was presented at trial, even the defense attorneys looked sick. Most of them returned to their rented apartment around 5:30 a.m. They change clothes, they start discussing getting their story straight. Group text messages begin. Lucas Pertossi, 5:43 a.m. Did the Negro expire? Ciro Pertossi, 5:44 a.m. IDK, but he wasn't moving when we left. Maximo Thompson, 5:45 a.m. Whatever, he started it. Let that sit. Did the Negro expire? That's how they talked about killing someone. But it gets worse. 6:30 a.m. Security footage shows 4 of them at McDonald's. They're ordering hamburgers, laughing, completely casual. The prosecutor would later say, killing made them hungry. 7:15 a.m. They're back at the apartment trying to destroy evidence, washing blood from their clothes. Security footage from the convenience store across the street shows Ciro Pertossi outside. He's licking his knuckles, trying to remove Fernando's blood from his hands with his tongue. A forensic expert testified, the act of licking his knuckles shows consciousness of guilt. He knew there was blood there. He knew whose blood it was. He knew it was evidence. This is someone trying to destroy proof of murder. And remember that selfie I showed you at the beginning? 5:10 a.m. 20 minutes after the attack. 6 of them posed for a photo. The metadata confirmed it. Their location was 2 blocks from where Fernando lay dying. In the photo, they're smiling. One is making a peace sign. Some have visible bloodstains on their clothes. The caption later added to the photo, "The boys." By 10 o'clock a.m., police had the security footage. By 10:30 a.m., they had witness statements. And by 10:38 a.m., they were surrounding the rugby players' apartment. 10:38 a.m., January 18, 2020. Police surround the apartment. All 8 are present. They hadn't even tried to run. They're immediately detained. Rights are read. Initial denial. We don't know what you're talking about. The evidence collected included blood-stained clothing from multiple perpetrators, all 8 phones, shoes with blood and tissue, witness statements already compiled, security footage from 12 different cameras. But before their lawyers arrived during the booking process, Maximo Thompson said something to a police officer, something that wasn't officially recorded but was reported by 3 different officers. He said, "You guys always believe us anyway. Watch." Always. How many times had this happened before? And then they tried something that showed just how coordinated they were. In initial questioning, all 8 told the exact same story, word for word. They blamed Pablo Ventura. a 21-year-old rower who was an acquaintance. They claimed, "He was there. He did it. We tried to stop him." It was obviously rehearsed, obviously coordinated. Police tracked Ventura down. He had been in Villa Gesell earlier in January, but he left on January 15th, 3 days before the murder. His family confirmed it. Receipts proved it. Yet he was still detained for questioning. His reputation was damaged. He would later file a defamation lawsuit. While the legal maneuvering continued, the real investigation was happening in a forensics lab in Buenos Aires. Prosecutor Zamboni had a problem. Yes, she had evidence. Tons of it. But Argentina had never successfully prosecuted a group murder like this before. 8 defendants, 8 separate defenses, all from families with money. She needed a case so airtight, so overwhelming, that no judge could let them walk. All 8 phones were sent to Dr. Ricardo Peruta, a digital forensics expert. Mission: recover everything, even deleted content. And what he found was gold. First, a group chat called Los Pibes, the boys. It had been active for months before the murder. The content? Boasting about fights, women, drinking. Racial slurs were common, plans for their fun in Villa Gesell. A message from January 12, 2020, 6 days before the murder, from Maximo Thompson. "This summer, we're going to own that beach. Any Negro gets in our way, we handle it." Second, Ciro Pertossi's search history from the morning of January 18th, 6:15 a.m. Villa Gesell fight. 6:17 a.m. How long until police find suspects? 6:23 a.m. Villa Gesell murder. 6:45 a.m. Lawyer Villa Gesell. 7 o'clock a.m. Villa Gesell fight. Again. Consciousness of guilt documented in real time. Third, previous fights they had recorded, showing off injuries, mocking victims. A December 2019 video showed them harassing an indigenous man on the street. The soundtrack? Their laughter. Prosecutor Zamboni wasn't just proving they killed Fernando. She was proving premeditation, pattern of behavior, coordination, racial motivation. The physical evidence was equally damning. Dr. Martine Sabatini, the medical examiner, found primary cause of death, traumatic cardiac arrest. Contributing factors: multiple severe skull fractures, brain hemorrhaging subdural hematoma. Additional injuries: 7 broken ribs, internal bleeding, facial fractures. Critical finding: a partial shoe print on Fernando's face that matched Maximo Thompson's sneaker. The medical examiner testified that one injury stood out: a skull fracture on the right temporal region. The force required to cause that fracture? Equivalent to a car traveling 40 kilometers per hour hitting a stationary object. That was Maximo's kick, the one that killed him. Under Fernando's fingernails, they found DNA from Blas Sinali and Ciro Pertossi. Fernando fought back. He tried to defend himself. He clawed at his attackers, and they just kept kicking. The defense attorneys had a nearly impossible job. 8 clients, mountains of evidence, viral videos, national outrage. So they tried something desperate, something that would require rewriting reality itself. Argument 1. It was a fight, not murder, claiming mutual combat. Both sides were fighting, requesting downgrade to homicide in a brawl, 6-year maximum instead of life. The prosecution's response: how is it a fight when 8 men surround one, kick him unconscious, then keep kicking? Argument 2. No premeditation, claiming spontaneous violence. Heat of the moment, didn't intend to kill. The prosecution's response? The 7 seconds of formation positioning, the deleted messages, planning violence, the complete lack of remorse. That's premeditation. Argument 3. Media bias prevents fair trial. claiming nationwide prejudice, requesting change of venue, closed proceedings. The judge denied it. The defendants' rights don't erase the public's right to justice. The families of the defendants launched a PR campaign. Parents appeared on TV. Our boys are good kids. They made a mistake. They don't deserve life sentences. And then one mother said something that made Argentina explode. My son has a bright future. He was going to study business administration. Is his life worth less than that boy's? That boy, Fernando Báez Sosa. She couldn't even say his name. The backlash was immediate. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Justicia para Fernando. #Rugbyers Asesinos. The Argentine Rugby Union issued a vague statement. Violence has no place in sport. No specific condemnation. No policy changes announced. Former players were furious. Some coaches resigned in protest, calling for cultural reform. All 8 were held in pretrial detention for 3 years, separated in different facilities to prevent coordination. Multiple appeals denied. And during those 3 years, Enzo Comelli was caught on prison surveillance doing something disturbing. He was showing other inmates how he'd thrown punches that night, demonstrating his technique, bragging about it. Guards reported he seemed proud. 3 years later, and he was still proud of beating someone to death. January 2nd, 2023, 3 years after Fernando's murder. The trial begins in Dolores, a small town 220 kilometers south of Buenos Aires. And when Silvino and Graciela walked into that courtroom, when they saw the 8 men who killed their son for the first time since his death, something happened that no one expected. Oral Criminal Court Number 1 of Dolores. 3 judges, Claudia Castro, Christian Rabina, and Emiliano Lazzari, the prosecution team led by Gustavo Garcia, multiple defense attorneys, press gallery packed. For the first time in Argentine history, a murder trial would be broadcast live on television. When Silvino Baez and Graciela Sosa arrived, they were dressed in white, Fernando's favorite color. Graciela wore Fernando's watch. They carried photos of their son. When Silvino saw Maximo Thompson, the man who delivered the fatal kick, he didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just stared. And Thompson? He looked away, couldn't meet his eyes. That moment was captured by cameras and went viral, because everyone understood what they were seeing. One father burying his son, another trying to avoid accountability. Prosecutor Gustavo Garcia stood and said, "I'm going to show you what these 8 men did. Not tell you, show you. You'll see it on video. You'll hear it from witnesses. You'll read it in their own words. And when you've seen it all, you'll understand this wasn't a fight. This was a hunt. This was a pack of wolves surrounding prey. And when they were done, they smiled about it." He was seeking life sentences for all 8 on charges of double aggravated homicide. Aggravating factor 1, alevosía, treachery, victim was defenseless. Aggravating factor 2, multiple attackers acting in coordination. Defense attorney Hugo Tomé countered, "My clients are not murderers. They're young men who made a terrible mistake in a chaotic situation." Was there violence? Yes. Was it tragic? Absolutely. But murder requires intent. And there was no intent to kill Fernando Báez Sosa. This was a fight that went tragically wrong. That's manslaughter, not murder. He requested 6-year maximum sentences. And then the prosecution played the footage. The compilation from 12 camera angles, synchronized to show the complete picture. Multiple spectators left the courtroom. Graciela Sosa wept openly. Silvino sat stone-faced, watching every single second. 2 of the defendants looked down, refusing to watch their own actions. Maximo Thompson's mother fainted. The judge called a 15-minute recess. When proceedings resumed, Giulietta Rossi took the stand. Fernando's girlfriend. She described his excitement for the trip, their plans for the future, the moment she saw him on the ground. "He squeezed my hand once in the ambulance," she said, crying. Then nothing. She couldn't continue. Tatiana Caro, the eyewitness, testified, "I heard them yelling, 'Negro de mierda, mátenlo.' They said they were taking him as a trophy. After he was on the ground not moving, they kept kicking. One of them said, 'Is he dead yet?' and laughed." Tomas Bidondo, another eyewitness. "I heard the final kick from across the street. The sound, I'll never forget it. Like a soccer ball. But it was his head. After that, Fernando didn't move again." Dr. Martin Sabatini showed skull x-rays, explained the injuries in clinical detail, described the fatal kick. Death was not instantaneous, but was inevitable from the head trauma. No one could survive those injuries. The deleted messages were displayed, the search history shown, the expired text, the previous violence videos. The timeline of their cover-up attempts was presented minute by minute. Blood-stained clothing was displayed in court. DNA results were explained. The shoe print match was demonstrated with Thompson's actual sneaker. For 3 years, the 8 defendants stayed silent. Now they had one chance to explain themselves, to show remorse, to prove they weren't monsters. 5 of them chose to speak, and what they said made things worse. "I didn't mean for him to die. I was just trying to defend my friends. I never touched him." The prosecution showed video of Luciano kicking Fernando, showed text messages from his phone. Luciano refused to answer further questions. "I want justice. What happened was terrible. I think about it every day. But it wasn't murder. It was a fight that went wrong." The prosecution asked, "You kicked Fernando Báez Sosa in the head with full force while he was unconscious. Was that self-defense?" Thompson, "I don't remember doing that." "You don't remember, or you don't want to admit it?" "I was drunk. Everything's blurry." "But not too drunk to pose for a selfie 20 minutes later?" Thompson refused to answer. "I felt prejudged from the moment I was arrested. The media convicted us before we had a trial." The prosecution asked, "Why did you search Villa Gesell fight multiple times the morning Fernando died?" "I wanted to see if there was news." "But you already knew what happened. You were there." "I don't remember." "You don't remember licking your knuckles on camera?" He refused to answer. "During this trial, I felt like I was in a zoo. Everyone staring, cameras everywhere. We're not animals. We're human beings who made a mistake." The irony was not lost on anyone in that courtroom. They didn't treat Fernando like a human being. Not one took full responsibility. Not one detailed what actually happened. Not one explained the racial slurs. Not one apologized to Fernando's family directly. Not one showed genuine understanding of what they'd done. The defense argued for homicide in a brawl with reduced sentences, claiming media prejudice affected fairness. The prosecution stood and delivered the closing argument. "They're asking you to believe this was spontaneous, but you've seen the evidence, the formation, the messages, the racial hatred, the trophy comment, the selfie, the hamburgers, the laughter. This wasn't spontaneous, this was predatory, and it was racist. These 8 men saw Fernando Báez Sosa as less than human, and they treated him accordingly." January 31st, 2023, verdict day. Argentina held its breath. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Thousands waited outside. Live TV coverage across Argentina and Paraguay. Life imprisonment. Maximo Thompson. Guilty. Double aggravated homicide. Ciro Pertosi. Guilty. Double aggravated homicide. Luciano Pertosi. Guilty. Double aggravated homicide. Matias Benecelli. Guilty. Double aggravated homicide. Enzo Comelli. Guilty. Double aggravated homicide. 15 years. Lucas Pertosi. Guilty. Aggravated homicide. Secondary role. Blasinali, guilty, aggravated homicide, secondary role. Ayrton Villalaz, guilty, aggravated homicide, secondary role. When Thompson's verdict was read, he fainted. Guards caught him. His mother was screaming. His father remained stoic. When all 8 were convicted, the courtroom erupted in applause. The judge allowed it. Silvino and Graciela embraced, both sobbing. Silvino whispered, "Fernando, they got justice. They got justice." Outside, thousands were celebrating, chanting Fernando's name. White balloons were released into the sky. Strangers hugged and cried. It was a national celebration. The judge's ruling stated, "The defendants treated Fernando Báez Sosa not as a human being, but as an object to be destroyed. Their actions before, during, and after the attack demonstrate a level of coordination and callousness that can only be described as depraved indifference to human life." Life imprisonment in Argentina equals 50 years with no possibility of parole for aggravated homicide. Graciela Sosa said through tears, "This doesn't bring Fernando back. Nothing ever will. But knowing these men can never hurt another family, there's some peace in that." Silvino Baez added, "Fernando wanted to be a lawyer defending people like us, immigrants, the vulnerable. He never got that chance, but today the justice system he believed in worked. Today he got justice." But there's more to this story. The verdict was celebrated. Justice served, right? Argentina could move on, proud it had done the right thing, except the conversation that needed to happen, the one about race, still wasn't happening. At least not in the mainstream. And that's when Fernando's father did something that changed everything. Look at the headlines from major Argentine outlets after the verdict. Rugby players convicted in brutal killing. Life sentences in Villa Gesell murder. Justice for Fernando Báez Sosa. Youth violence ends in tragedy. Notice what's missing? Minimal mention of racism. Focus on rugby culture and youth violence. Class was mentioned. Race was avoided. Even the phrase negro de mierda was often omitted from coverage. The 163-page court ruling referenced racist slurs 12 times in witness testimony. But there was zero analysis of racism as motivation. The racial element was treated as incidental, not central. Dr. Federico Pita, an Afro-Argentine political scientist, explained, "Argentina convicted 8 men for murder, which is good, but it avoided the harder conversation. Why did they target Fernando specifically? What made them believe they could? Race shaped everything about this case, but saying it out loud, Argentina isn't ready for that." And then on February 8, 2023, Silvino published an open letter. The headline, "My son was killed because of racism. Argentina needs to say it. My son Fernando was beaten to death for racist reasons." This was hate. Maybe the perpetrators felt superior because they are blonde and Fernando had darker skin. Maybe they saw him as less than human because we're Paraguayan. Maybe they thought no one would care about killing a Negro. But Argentina, you need to say it. This was racism, and until we name it, it will keep happening. For 3 years, I've watched people call this youth violence, rugby culture, class issues. All of that is true, but it's incomplete. They called my son negro de mierda. They said they were taking him as a trophy. You don't say those things about someone you see as your equal. I don't want Fernando's death to be about everything except race, because that's what always happens in Argentina. We talk around it. We use other words. We pretend race doesn't matter here, but it does. It killed my son. The letter went viral, shared millions of times. Some outlets finally started using the word racism. Others doubled down on avoidance. A TV host with a huge platform invited Silvino on his show. The interview should have been respectful, supportive. Instead, this host said something so offensive that it became a national scandal. Host: Silvino, with all due respect, don't you think you're making this about race when it's really about violence? Silvino: with all due respect, when someone calls my son negro de mierda while killing him, how is that not about race? Host: but negro in Argentina just means poor, lower class. It's not racial. Silvino: Fernando was a law student. He wasn't poor, but he had brown skin. He had indigenous features from his Paraguayan heritage, and that's what they saw, not his economics, his skin. So please, don't tell me this isn't about race. You're doing exactly what they did, pretending we don't exist as racialized people, making us invisible. My son is dead. He's visible to me. The clip went viral. The host was criticized. The show issued an apology. And Silvino became a voice for Argentina's anti-racism movement. After Fernando's case, journalists investigated similar incidents. What they found was disturbing. Similar attacks in Argentina, 2015 to 2023, 2018. Cordoba, Bolivian man beaten by rugby team, 2019. Buenos Aires, Paraguayan worker attacked outside club, 2020. Fernando Báez Sosa, 2022. Brian Quitino, Venezuelan immigrant killed by group, 2023. Agustin Avila, another group beating by athletes. Victims: darker-skinned, immigrant background, or indigenous appearance. Attackers: groups of young men, often athletes, often middle-upper class. Locations: outside nightclubs, late night. Language: racial slurs. Common: aftermath. Attackers show little remorse. Media: racism rarely centered in coverage. Sociologist Sebastian Bruno said, Fernando's case wasn't an outlier. It was the one that got caught on camera that couldn't be ignored. But this violence? It's systemic. It's cultural, and it's been happening for decades. 5 years after the murder, 3 years after conviction. Where are the 8 men who killed Fernando? And more importantly, have they changed? Maximo Thompson keeps to himself. Minimal contact, family visits monthly. No interviews granted. Ciro and Luciano Pertossi are in the same facility but different units. Not allowed contact. Ciro has been in disciplinary actions twice for fighting. Mattias Benicelli is participating in educational programs. His family claims he's found God. Enzo Comelli has refused work assignments and complained about conditions. Remember, he was caught bragging about the attack. 15-year sentence group, now 23 to 26 years old, Lucas Pertossi, Blas Sinali, and Ayrton Violas are eligible for review in 2031 after serving minimum 8 years. Mixed reports on behavior. In November 2025, Marcos Pertossi, father of Ciro and Luciano, gave an interview. My sons are living in precarious conditions. They made a mistake, but they're still human. I tried to contact Fernando's parents on Instagram to apologize, to hug them. They never responded. I think about it every night. Some families maintain innocence narratives. Others express remorse. All are asking for reduced sentences on appeal. Silvino and Graciela still live in Buenos Aires. Silvino reduced his work hours, age and trauma taking their toll. Graciela still works in hospice care. Both are active in victim advocacy. They speak at schools and universities. They work with anti-racism organizations. Every January 18th, they hold an annual vigil. They never responded to the Pertossi family's outreach. In a recent interview, Graciela said, "People ask if I forgive them. I can't. Maybe that makes me a bad person, but I can't. They took everything from me, my only child, my future, everything. And some of them still don't think they did anything wrong." After Fernando's death, Argentina promised change. Rugby reformed, nightclub security improved, anti-violence campaigns launched. 5 years later, here's the truth. Rugby reforms, Argentine Rugby Union, mandatory ethics courses, 4,000 plus players completed behavioral training. Some clubs implement zero-tolerance policies, background checks for youth programs, nightclub industry, security, training in de-escalation, improved camera coverage, better crowd management, cultural shifts, more awareness of group violence, some de-glamorization of rugbyer culture, youth campaigns about bystander intervention. The violence continues. Similar attacks in 2022, 2023, 2024. Different perpetrators, same patterns. Victims still often racial minorities or immigrants. The conversation stalls. Mainstream media still avoids racism. Political will lacking for real reform. Educational system doesn't address racial bias. No national reckoning. Dr. Annie Okoro Luongo said, Fernando's case was a catalyst. It exposed everything. But exposure isn't change. Argentina saw itself in a mirror and didn't like what it saw, so it looked away. The violence continues because the underlying attitudes, the dehumanization of certain bodies, hasn't been addressed at a societal level. Here's what Argentina still hasn't accepted. Fernando Báez Sosa was killed because 8 men saw him as less than human. And they saw him that way because their entire society had taught them, implicitly and explicitly, that people who look like Fernando are less than human. Until Argentina addresses that, there will be more Fernandos. Just 2 weeks ago, Netflix released 50 Seconds, the Fernando Báez Sosa case. 3 episodes, millions of viewers worldwide. Suddenly, Fernando's story isn't just Argentina's story anymore, it's global. But the documentary made a controversial choice. 5 of the 8 convicted gave on-camera interviews from prison, speaking about their experience, discussing prison conditions. Some laughed on camera, limited remorse shown. Critics asked, why give them a platform? Why humanize murderers? The filmmakers argued, understanding how they think prevents future violence. Graciela said, I participated because Fernando's story needs to be told, but it hurt seeing them on screen, seeing them try to justify what they did. So what do we learn from Fernando's case? Recognize group violence dynamics. Groups embolden individuals. Pack mentality removes individual responsibility. If you're in a group getting aggressive, leave. If you see escalation, get help immediately. Practice bystander intervention. Don't assume someone else will help. Call authorities. Create distance between parties when safe. Document what you can. Recognize dehumanization. Slurs are warning signs. Trophy language means treating a person as an object. If you hear this in your friend group, speak up. Silence is complicity. Understand your privilege. If you're in a dominant group, race, class, whatever, you have a responsibility to check your peers. But he's my friend isn't an excuse. Name racism. You can't solve what you won't acknowledge. Stop using euphemisms. Language matters. Reform sports culture. Team bonding doesn't equal pack mentality. Coaches must address toxic masculinity. Athletics should teach character, not entitlement. Educational intervention, anti-racism. Education in schools, teaching about implicit bias. Historical context, empathy training, systemic accountability. Media must center racism when present. Legal systems must recognize hate crimes. Institutions must acknowledge failures. Fernando Báez Sosa never became a lawyer. He never defended the vulnerable. He never got to live his dream. But his death accomplished something he couldn't have done alive. It forced Argentina to look at itself, not completely, not successfully, but it started the conversation. His story became a mirror, exposing privilege, revealing racism, showing systemic failures. His parents became voices, speaking truth to power, refusing to let society forget. His name became a call. Justice for Fernando means justice for all. 8 men convicted. Life sentences delivered. Thousands march annually. Millions know his name. Countless conversations started. Similar attacks continue. Racism persists. Systems remain unchanged. The work continues. To his memory, tell his story completely, not sanitized. Center his humanity, not just his victimhood. Acknowledge all factors, including race. To his family, support their advocacy, share their message, respect their pain, honor their strength. To ourselves, be vigilant against dehumanization. Speak up against discrimination. Intervene when safe. Do the internal work on our biases. To the future, create systems that protect the vulnerable, build cultures that value all lives equally, teach the next generation differently. Prevent the next Fernando. Here's what I want you to remember. Fernando Báez Sosa was 18 years old. He was a son, a boyfriend, a friend, a student. He had dreams. He had plans. He had a future. In 50 seconds, 8 men took all of that away. But why? That's the question that matters. Not just that they killed him, but why they felt entitled to. Why they saw him as less than human. Why they thought they'd get away with it. Why Argentina struggled to call it what it was. This case isn't just about Argentina. Every country has its Fernandos. People killed because of who they are, what they look like, where they're from. People dehumanized by systems that benefit others. So here's my call to action. Recognize dehumanization when you see it. Speak up even when it's uncomfortable. Support organizations fighting hate violence. Share Fernando's story, but tell it completely. Demand change from your institutions. Do the work on your own biases. At True Crime Buff HQ, we seek justice for the voiceless. Fernando has a voice now. His parents make sure of that. But there are countless others who don't, whose stories don't go viral, whose killers don't get convicted, whose names we'll never know. This is why we do this work. This is why these stories matter. Because every victim deserves justice. Every family deserves answers. And every society needs to confront its ugliest truths. Fernando Jose Báez Sosa, born March 2, 2001, died January 18, 2020. 18 years old, law student, loving son, devoted boyfriend. Loyal friend, dreamer. You deserve better than those 50 seconds. You deserve better than the society that failed to protect you. You deserve the life you should have lived. Rest in power, Fernando. We won't forget you. We won't stop fighting. And we won't let your death be in vain.